Hello everyone, and today we're going to look at the Italian game with the fourth move, d3, and there we're going to go into some main lines. Let's start. We're starting with e4. White is going for the king's pawn. We are developing with our king's pawn as well. Classical approach to the 1 e4 opening. Knight f3. White is challenging our pawn on e5. We're defending with knight on c6. Bishop c4. Here we are arriving at the Italian game opening. The main idea of white is to just slowly develop, just maneuver the pieces, later play for the d4 move. And here there are many approaches how to continue with black. One of them, which is very common, is bishop c5, just developing move with the bishop. But it's not really challenging that much, and we're entering the territory of white with a slow game or quiet game, gioco piano. So that's why the move which we're suggesting is knight f6. It's more challenging move. Immediately it's asking a question to the pawn on e5, attacking it, and white has to find a way to defend it, and it's not always so easy. So d3 is one of the main moves here. White is defending the pawn on e4 with a d-pawn, with, again, potential opportunities later to go for the d4 after castle, bringing the rook to e1, defending the pawn, and then going for the d4 pawn. But we're not giving time white for that, and we're immediately challenging the center with a d5 pawn. First of all, we're discussing in many chapters this d5 push. We want to try to make it work. And sometimes when it works, we have to make sure, okay, it can happen. In this particular case, d5 is pretty much the most critically direct approach from black. We cannot say that it's refuting Italian and everyone would play it, but it's definitely a very interesting try, and positions which we're going to get are going to be very dynamic. Something what probably the Italian player doesn't want to get. So that's why d5 is a very nice move. So here, pawn takes on d5 is the main continuation. We grab the pawn with a knight as well, and the main move for white is castle. So white castled. White wants to bring the rook on to e1 as fast as possible and target the pawn on e5. In this structure, our main problem usually is pawn on e5 or pawn on f7, depending where the bishop is going to retreat, because now we're playing knight b6. It's not the most common move. Normally here, bishop e7 is played on the top level. But we're going for knight b6, immediately asking a question to the bishop. Where do you want to go, to b3 or to b5? And we have in other chapter bishop coming to b3. If bishop goes to b3, the pressure is keeping on the pawn on f7. In this case, bishop goes to b5. So now the main idea is to create as much of the pressure, to put as much of pressure as possible on the pawn on e5 from white. So we have to defend it, and okay, next move is not a surprise. We're going for bishop d6, and we are ready to short castle. Here there are a few moves which white can play in this position, and we're going to start with the move which is not really that challenging, which is queen e2. While here, after castle, it may feel like white can win a pawn after take on c6 and knight takes on e5, but after it happens, after queen e7, we are pinning this knight, and after f6, we are going to win the piece. So knight e5 is most likely going to transpose into the bishop takes on c6 line, but let's see and try to understand how we have to react. Okay, we take with a bishop, obviously. In case bishop takes on c6, bc, rook e1, queen a7, and we transpose to the variation of bishop takes c6, the main line. So rook e1, if case it will be played now we are in time to castle, because now we're defending the bishop on e5, and there is no pin any longer. So that after bishop takes on c6, we have an intermezzo, which is saving the pawn structure for us. We are taking the pawn back on h2, king takes, and we have queen d6, attacking, double attacking at the same time king and the bishop. We're going to grab the bishop, and we will not have an issue with our pawn structure. The other move is a directly is a direct approach against the e5 pawn. White is going for d4 immediately, offering to trade it. So the problem is here, if we're going to trade it, then looking at the position, we're going to just eliminate the pawn from this file, introduce knight into the position, to target the knight on c6. There are many bad things in this move, and we're also behind in the development, so we shouldn't do this. So if d4 is played in this position, we go for e4. So here we don't have any other option. And if you're afraid of d5, so you shouldn't be afraid, because we're always going to have something on this d5 move. Either it will be knight takes on d5, or it's going to be an a6 move. And of course, also knight on f3 is hanging on the other side. So yeah, definitely there is going to be something there, so we shouldn't get worried. In case knight jumps to g5, which would target the e5, e4 pawn, and also a little bit the pawn on f7, then we go for castle. This move was never played, but it's just a bit, I mean, just a move which is attacking the pawn, not coming back, but coming to g5. So castle, in case knight takes on e4, we take on d4, and the point is that we are always having the issue. White is always has an issue on h2. So in case of queen d4, obviously white is losing a queen. In case of bishop d3, we're just bringing the bishop back. We're not letting white to take our bishop, and we are having around equal position. So knight d6 feels like something better. So knight d6, queen d6. Now bishop goes to d3 and rook d8. We're just arrived at the position where white had a bishop pair, but we're slightly improved in the development, and we have nice knight on d4. In the next move, actually, we're going to exchange the bishops, because bishop f5 is a big threat, and it's not so easy to stop. In case bishop takes on c6, so white is trying first to break our pawn structure and then take on e4. Well, here we have bishop h2. Just thanks to this move, we're keeping the pawn and advantage. Not advantage, but okay, we can say that on king side we're keeping slight advantage due to the pawn structure and absence of pawn on h2. We could create an attack on the king side, but generally we're aiming to exchange the double pawn on the queen side, and yeah, put some pressure on white. We can also bring the queen to g6, bishop to f5, targeting the c2 square. So yeah, we definitely have ideas, or bringing the bishop to the b7, to the long diagonal where it belongs. And if case rook e1 is played immediately, first of all, stopping the idea of taking on f3. Secondly, attacking the pawn. Well, now there is no pawn on d3, so we can go for f5, immediately defending the pawn on e4. In case c4 is played, since, I mean, d5 is not really working out due to all the knight, d5, bishop h2, and so on. So white is preparing it by playing c4. Now we're going for castle. Now the knight is not pinned any longer. So now white is going for the other fork, for the c5. But here we are already in time, because king is not on e8 any longer. We can take the knight on f3, what we are doing. Queen b3, white is attacking our king. We have to go with rook to f7. And after bishop c6, bc, pawn takes, queen d3, we are arriving at around equal position. We have an interesting pawn structure with the pawns on d6 and c6. And white has isolated pawn on d4, so it's going to be an interesting endgame. We have opposite colored bishops. So yeah, it's tough to say who is better here, but definitely there are pros and cons for each side, and we're going to try to continue pushing in this endgame. That was a c4. In case bishop goes to g5, first attacking our queen, well, then first of all, going to with bishop to e7 is kind of also fine, but we're going for queen d7. So the idea is that actually it feels a little bit scary because of all the d5 threat, but actually it's not really working out. So let's try. After d5, of course, we're just... Okay, first of all, the knight takes d5 already works, but there is a tiny little move which was suggested by the computer, first playing h6, including this move, because white has to go back, and now taking on d5. So yeah, basically queen cannot take since there is a bishop h2, and we're going to win the queen. So c4, white has to prepare d5 push like this, at the same time threatening this fork on c5 to our knight on b6 and bishop on d6. But now we're just castling because we're introducing idea of taking on f3. That's why any kind of push is not going to be a problem for us. Let's start first with a d5. So in case d5 push will happen, we are just taking on f3, queen f3, and now knight d4. We're attacking queen and the bishop at the same time. And also take on f3 is going to be with a check. So we're actually going to end up piece up. If knight goes back to d2, so keeping both of the threats, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So here we're going with, first of all, following mindset. We're having an issue with c6, d6, and b6, and how to handle all of it. Well, we have to take one of the pieces and move. And if we move the queen, then there is c5 fork, so we cannot do this. If we move this knight, then queen is lost. If we move this knight anyway, d5 is happening. So we have to go with a bishop e7. We're offering a trade and we're threatening to take the bishop. So it's also a threat. I shouldn't forget that offering a trade is also a threat. And this position it is, because after bishop takes, we grab with a queen. And now there is no pin any longer. So after bishop c6, pawn takes c6, we are having a good pawn structure. Pretty interesting position because d4 pawn is going to be weak, even though we have our weaknesses on the c file. We're going to have a bishop. For now, it's not playing so well, but it could be, it could target some pawns on the queen side. And generally, position is good. The pawns are good. What we are having on e4 and f5, we are ready to put pressure on the d4 pawn. So yeah, definitely slight edge for black. So c5 is played. It's a fork on our pieces, so we have to go for the take on the f3, definitely taking that knight. So if pawn takes the bishop, which is not so challenging actually, taking the knight is better. But it feels, for human nature, I think it feels better to take on d6, because white would take the bishop. So we take with a queen. Now there is no pin any longer. d5. Now we can just play. Moving the knight. Taking the knight with the knight on d5 would be actually a big problem, because after bishop c4, bishop b6, which is defending it, there is a beautiful rook e6. If we take with a queen, there is bishop d5, and we're going to lose it. So it's not working. And if we move the queen away, knight away, then there is a bishop f4 problem, since after queen g6, which is a checkmate threat, g3 is played. And again, we're having issues on e5, c7, so it's not really working out. Okay, so that's why in this position we have to find an intermezzo, which is very important, which is h6. So we had some issues because of this bishop, when it could go to the f4 square or to e7, creating a fork on queen and the rook. So now we're asking the bishop, where does it want to go? To h4 or all the way back? And for example, in case bishop goes to h4, we have knight e5. Now already we have a different story. Now bishop cannot go to f4. So in case of bishop goes to g3, then we have f4, and we're just fine. We're just great, winning the piece. In case of pawn takes on c6, we're trading the queens and taking the bishop on g5. We're getting into this interesting endgame. So we're having, first of all, an extra pawn on the king side, which of course, if white will take on f3, will not have, but then the structure will be compromised for white. So it's a little, it's interesting position. It looks slightly better because I think there's going to be a problem on the king side for white due to our pawn on f3. So there are going to be an issues, and so far we're just up a pawn. Knight c3. So defending on on d5 and defending the bishop. So basically the main idea is for white is to allow take first, and then white would take on d6, on c6, sorry. So hg, dc happens, we trade. White is bringing the rook, which was standing on e1. Now it looks like more active position for white. a6, targeting the bishop. So now we're basically going to have this kind of endgame. Bishop f1, bishop goes back. Now we take on c6, rook e7, bishop b7. White is getting the pawn on c7. We're still up a pawn, but after rook f7 trade happens. gf, white is getting back the pawn, and a5. Looking at the position, the pawn structure is pretty strange. We have some weaknesses on the queen side, we can say, or at least we have different pawn islands, I mean isolated pawns. And white has problems on the king side. So it's around equal considering all the weaknesses and all the piece activity. So the big problem for white that they cannot do anything on the d file because we're stopping all kind of entries of the rook. So yeah, I mean, position is around equal. So CB looks like a more critical and ambitious approach. So now we're going for h6, again, the intermediate move. Now we force the bishop again, go where it wants, but on the it's going to go on the war square. On h4 or just somewhere back. So if bishop goes to h4, then we have very nice move f4. The whole idea of it that g5 anytime is going to come, then the bishop is going to be trapped on g3. It's not, it will be, we're just going to win the bishop. And other than that, there is queen coming to g4 threats, attacking the king on g2 because it would be just a checkmate. So in case white goes for a d5, for example, there is just queen g4 and black is just going to win the material. Knight d2, white is trying to bring the other piece to take on g3 with the knight. Now we take on g2. So the point is that in case white is taking on c7, we just take with the queen, and we're getting into this very interesting position where we have this pawn on g2. We have interesting pawn structure on the king side. Meanwhile, white has an extra pawn on the queen side, and we have extra 2 pawns on the king side. So very complex position, like for both sides, very complex. But I would say we have some opportunities to attack the king due to all the light squared weaknesses on the king side. In case d5 is played, white is pointing out that they want to get this knight. Then we go for a sacrifice of the piece, and we go for f3. The point here is that these pawns are super strong, and already the threats of bishop h2 are in the picture. So for example, if white is not careful and is grabbing a knight, well, then we take on h2, king takes, queen h3, queen h1, checkmate. And the game is over. So that's why white has to take the pawn on f3. But now we have another sacrifice. Rook takes on f3, queen takes, and now knight d4, attacking the queen and the bishop at the same time. So the problem is that there is going to be a check on f3. So after queen d3, knight b5, and we're just getting into the position where we are having 2 pieces for the rook. And again, pawn structure is a bit messy on the queen side, so clearly better position for black. If bishop goes back to d2, well, of course, on d2, bishop is safer, but of course, it would be nicer for knight to go to d2 at some moment. Also, it stops defense over the d4 pawn and so on, so it's not probably the best square for the bishop in the position, but what to do? Bishop had to go somewhere. So queen f7, the main idea is to remove queen from the spin and introduce ideas of queen g6 or queen h5, attacking the king on the king side, since there are no real pieces which are defending the king. So bishop takes c6, pawn takes, white spoiled our structure. Queen takes f3. Finally, white accepted that pawn, and now we go for a takes b6. Now we have not this pawn structure with pawns on c file and pawn on a7, but we have these pawns all together that they are not necessarily have to be weaknesses, even though the rook, the a file opened, now it's semi-open file on which rook is targeting the pawn on a2, and we're already ready to take it. So yeah, we're having definitely great positions. We approved, and let's not forget about our bishop pair. Objectively, this position is around equal. So let's see after h6 what happens if white is going for d5. So white is saying I'm going to take the knight on c6 or trade it for the bishop on g5. Well, we have to take. We are forced to do it. We don't have any other choice. Pawn takes on d6 on c6. We take it and target the bishop at the same time. So now, in case bishop goes to c4, which is coming with a check, we go to h7. And it's actually perfect position because just imagine if the pawn would not be here, then there would be a checkmate on h5. But if our pawn is on f3, it's not working. So now queen f3. And now we're going g4, stopping any kind of checks on the h file. And basically, we're just getting much better positions with a bishop here. Interesting pawn structure on the king side, definitely. It looks like king is not safe, but behind this pawns, not much which is going to happen to our king. So yeah, that's why definitely clearly better position for black. If queen takes on f3 immediately, it's already introducing a strat because the main idea of it that the rook is hanging on a8, we cannot take the bishop, and now the bishop take on c6 is the threat. So here we actually don't have any other choice rather than to accept that and give white the exchange, because if we're going to be very greedy and playing something like bishop b7, after bishop c4 we will resign because king h7 there is just going to be checkmate on h5, so we will have to give up a lot of material here. So c takes b5 has to be played. Now queen a8, we sacrifice an exchange. In return we also got the bishop pair. And in this position, c6 is also already possible, trying to trap the queen, but it's maybe a bit more complex. C takes on b6 works as well, because next move what we want to go for is bishop b7. So in case white is going very slowly and just develops the knight without anything, then we're just going to win the queen, because after bishop b7, queen a7, queen c6, the checkmate threat on g2. After a3, we're just going to win the queen with rook a8. In case of queen f3, it would be a bit too slow because black would just be able to develop very quickly with bishop b7, queen b3, king h7 moving away. Now queen h3, our king is already on g6 and it's pretty safe because it's behind these beautiful pawns on g5 and f5. Knight e2, white is trying to introduce another piece in the position, but here we have g4. Thanks to our bishops, all the dark squares which we weakened, they're not going to be actually weak for white, and it's actually for black, sorry, but that's actually white who has to worry, because after queen h4, rook e8, and we are introducing already strats of queen c6 in the position, targeting the pawn on g2, and yeah, in case of the trade, then there is of course going to be the e file for black. Meanwhile, the queen on h4 is doing not really much. There are no strats. I mean, queen is standing very beautifully and super close to our king, but there is nothing what white can do here, so we're slightly better. Queen d5 with a check coming all the way here, so king h7, our typical move. Now there is a threat actually of bishop h2, so there is something what white should do about the queen, defend it or move it away. In case white defends it with a knight on c3, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So here we go for b4, targeting the knight. If knight moves, we have the bishop takes h2 again. So rook a to d1 has to be played, but now after rook d1, we are again introducing the threat of bishop takes h2. So if rook just goes for d1, then it's not working any longer. Then there is no knight on c3, there is no b4, so it's not really working. So now we play rook f6, defending the bishop on d6, with the idea of going for rook h6, targeting the h2 pawn. So knight c3, white finished the development with a knight finally, also introduces some ideas of taking on b5. So now we go rook h6 in case of just to attack the pawn on h2. So in case white defends, there are two moves basically how white can defend h3 and g3. In case white goes for g3, then we are having b4 again. Knight goes to b5, attacking our bishop on d6. And here we have a nice move, bishop b7. So of course, white cannot grab the bishop with the queen due to our rook defending it. So queen has to move to c4. And now we go to a6, pinning the knight. And after rook d5, so we're just winning time here. After rook d5, we have bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes. We are going into the endgame and playing bishop c5. We are just bringing the rook to the prison on the b5 square. The rook cannot move anywhere due to this bishop. And even if white is going to do something like playing a3, we can always close the position with a5. And, well, the only choice for white would be to give up the rook for the bishop. But of course, even in that endgame, it's going to be around equal. So it's most likely to have a drawish outcome in this game. But still, interesting try. If in case h3 is played, it looks safer. But so the only thing is that since g3 was weakening a lot the light squares, now h3 is not really weakening them, so it feels better. But now we have g4. We are opening up the king side. In case queen takes on b5, white is grabbing a pawn. We have queen e7, just moving it away. And we're having very strong attack against the king with our bishop pair, our rook, queen. White has no single piece on the king side to defend the king, so it's super tough position for white. In case knight takes on b5 with, of course, target on the d6, then we go bishop b7 again, similar like in the other line, attacking the queen. Queen moves away to c4. Now bishop a6 again, attacking. So now rook defense on d5. We're taking on h3 now. Now we can do it. Queen d3, the main idea now to create an attack on our bishop on d6. And now we take bishop dp5. Queen takes, we're going for queen e6, moving away. We're not trading our pieces. And we're still keeping our attack ongoing. Now we're threatening already to take on g2 and create many different ideas, implement them in life, like rook h1, queen g6. So we definitely have a lot of ideas here as black, and also playing moves like g3 would not work due to h2 and queen e4, so it's not really working out. Very nice position for black, and at least compensation for the material. So that was all the it was all this line of d4 when white is trying to open up immediately. So the next move is rook e1, and so far it's the most popular move, and basically makes a lot of sense, bringing the rook out on the semi-open file, targeting the pawn on e5, using the pin on c6, so it looks great. So here we are going for f6, defending the pawn on e5, and then we are ready to castle. Knight e4 is an interesting try, using the fact of this pin and this pin, attacking the knight on c6. Here we are just playing bishop d7 and defending the knight. So in case bishop takes on c6, we're taking with a pawn. In case of queen f3, we're just castling. Knight f6, we're giving up a pawn. But after queen e8, knight e5, f5, we have a nice center with e5 and f5 squares. Once knight is going away, we're going to have bishop c6. Our bishops are going to be strong, so we have at least a compensation for the pawn. So if queen comes to h5, it's actually interesting here, because it feels like that we can go for g6. But the problem with g6 is queen f3, because now after c5, knight c6, we have to take. We cannot move the queen since f6 would hang. bishop takes, queen takes, and well, we're in a bit of a trouble. Now in this position, white is slightly better. King f8, just stepping with the king away, is better move. So now after knight f5, there is queen e8 offering the trade. Queen goes back to f3, now queen g6, and after knight d6, we're taking with the pawn. Now we undoubled our pawns, also we gave up our bishop pair advantage, but we're going to have a very nice pawn structure in the center. We will artificially castle in some way, and just going to be an interesting and imbalanced position. So in case knight takes on c6, we're grabbing with the pawn again, bishop a6, and after castle knight e2, we're just playing king h8 as a prophylactical move against all kinds of the attacks on this diagonal. So b3, knight comes to d5, bishop b2, and now bishop to e8. Okay, we're having different ideas in this position. For now, we just brought the king to the safety, and well, we're just waiting to see what white is doing. So far, we have a very nice pawn chain against this bishop as well. So I would not push, of course, f4, f5 anytime soon. So for now, we're just waiting, going to see what white is doing. And yeah, I mean, not such a clear position, but we are going to have counterattack definitely. So d4, trying to open up us immediately and attacking the pawn on e5. Of course, here we cannot push any longer forward because the pawn just will be taken. So here we have to go castle. And the main point here is that after pawn takes on e5, okay, actually here white has to take on c6 if white wants to spoil our structure, because after d takes on e5, knight takes on e5. This was not actually played too many times. It was a few times met, a couple of times met in the match Leko against Morozevich, this position. And here, after knight e5 in the game, black took with the bishop, which is interesting approach. And with the human perspective, looking with white at this position, it probably feels like there is no sense into getting into this position because white is not weakening pawn structure of black, and there is a very nice bishop on e5. But actually, there is one problem with the pawn structure of black, and it's the pawn on f6. We would love to have the pawn on f7 because it's not so easy how to develop the bishop from c8, for example, and yeah, so it's a drawback in the position. So here white actually can try to go and play. That's why we're taking not with a bishop, but with a pawn. We're always, or very often, we're going to get this pawn structure with a pawn on e5, and most likely also we're going to get also pawn structure with the doubled c-file pawns. But also we're going to have this beautiful semi-open file for the rook. That one of the concept of our play against this line with black. And we're going to have an attacking opportunity against the f2 pawn, and sometimes also bishop pair. So these are the two things. So pawn structure we're not actually very happy about. Of course, pawn structure could be better, but it's definitely more ambitious to go for a take with a pawn on e5 rather than with the bishop. So knight goes to c3. White is immediately starting to blockade the pawn on e5. We're going for bishop f5. It's always good to keep an eye on e4 square so that in case knight comes, we can sometimes take it. Bishop e3, so just going for a normal development. Here, bishop b4, the idea is to pin the knight so it's not coming to e4. And offering the trade. And after trade, queen d8, rook a d8, we're just getting into round equal position. Again, due to our work on f-file, semi-open f-file, and open d-file, and generally more active pieces, I would say we have compensation for this pawn on e5. But so far, it's also not so easy find a way to attack the pawn, since the problem would be for white, even if they try to attack the pawn, they would have to move the bishop from e3. And if white is moving the bishop from e3, they are removing the defender from f2. So then moves like bishop c5 would be easier. Of course, also at the same time, there is a pin on this on this rook, so knight d5 could be happening at some moment. So it's very interesting position and not so clear. So if knight immediately goes to e4, now we have bishop b4 with a double attack, attacking or threatened to take on e1 and to trade the queens. So if c3 is played, then we're trading the queens. The knight is hanging. Now we go backwards to e7. The knight is still hanging. Rook e1, and now we go rook a d8. And basically now we're threatening to take on e4 and checkmate. So it means that white will have to develop the bishop, but it's not so easy to find a good square for the bishop from c1 to develop. So that's why we're having also around equal position, compensation for our pawn structure, which is not so good. In case of bishop d2, well, then we take, queen takes, knight takes. Now knight is already away from e4. And now we go c6, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to f1. We grab the pawn on c2. Rook takes on e5. Well, and now we got rid of our weak pawn on e5, traded it for the c2 pawn. We're getting into the endgame, complete equalities in the position. And our rooks are probably more active, even though, okay, white is already also ready to go into the seventh rank. So it's around equal, of course. In case white takes, queen e8, rook a d8, c3, attacking the bishop. Now we take on e4. We're trading this knight for this bishop. cb, because, okay, of course, white cannot take on e4 due to the checkmate. And now bishop d3. We're offering a trade. The bishop takes, rook takes, and this is an equal position. Because even though our pawn on e5 is a weakness, white is also having now double pawns, so it's going to be easier for us to attack those pawns on b4 and b2. And also at the same time, okay, f2 could be an issue at some moment as well. And for time being, white even cannot grab the pawn on e5 due to the checkmate on the first rank. So that was the d takes e5 move. Now we're going to look at the bishop takes c6. This is basically the main idea for white, to completely ruin the pawn structure, because after bishop takes on c6, pawn takes. Okay, here let's say white doesn't want to ruin yet, so white is going for h3. Then we are taking on d4, of course, knight d4 and queen d7, just defending the pawn. Knight c3 and then rook e8. So we basically won the bishop pair. For that, we got this pawn, doubled pawn on c5, but it's not so easy to attack them for now because they're not on the some semi-open file or something like this. So yeah, that's why, and we have to try to use our power of the double of the bishop pair. So that's what we have to do. So in case pawn takes on e5, we take with the pawn, of course, and we're going to suffer a bit with the pawn structure, but we're going to have beautiful bishops. And again, we're going to have the semi-open f-file. Here there are, again, many moves for white which are possible. Let's start with knight c3. Okay, first of all, knight c3, immediately trying to get to this beautiful e4 square. We go for bishop g4, pinning the knight on f3, already creating a threat to take on f3 and create troubles in the pawn structure. Rook e3 trying to defend, of course, logical. Now queen e8, very interesting. So we want to bring the queen somewhere to g6 or h5 to create an attack. So h3, white is attacking. Bishop goes to h5. Now knight e4. Now knight d5, targeting the rook on e3. And now rook goes to b3, all the way to the queen side, because that's basically the only square where the rook can defend the knight. So knight f6, now attacking the knight, which is on like having an outpost. After knight d6, pawn takes. Well, we're getting into the position where we managed to undouble our pawns. We're having e4 as a threat, taking on f3 is also a threat. So there are definitely many ideas here for black, and we can already say that we are clearly better in this endgame. So after knight bd2, knight is not only challenging to go on the e4 square, but also it defends the knight on f3, which is different to the knight c3 move. So now we go bishop g4. Basically, yeah, knight e4 is not a move any longer because we would just double the pawns on the f3. So queen e2, white is trying to get rid of this pin, developing the queen and also attacking the pawn on e5. So now bishop h5, just moving the queen away for the sake of prophylaxis, because we want to move the knight at some moment to d5, and we don't want to allow this double attack with the queen to c4. So now queen d3 is getting out, and now there is no pin any longer on this diagonal. Now we go for knight d4. Our pieces are active. We have a bishop pair. Again, our pawn structure is not the best, definitely, but we're still going to have many ideas, like bringing the knight to f4, queen to the queen side. We will bring the king to h8 in order to have them, prophylaxis against any kind of checks on this diagonal. Rook will come to e8 and so on. So we're just having an interesting attack in this position, and for sure compensation for the pawn structure. Case of h3, so white's stopping our bishop g4 ideas. We cannot go there. Here, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. And here we have a very interesting idea. We're going for sacrificing the pawn with e4. Why is it so good? First of all, where white cannot really take it right away, yeah, because of bishop h2. But of course, white will be able to take it after knight g5 and then capturing. The main idea is to open up our pieces, giving up the pawn, let white to waste some time to win the pawn. And for example, now we go for queen f6, attacking the pawn. Knight takes e4, very logical, defending and attacking. So now queen g6, we are creating another threat because we are pinning this pawn. Now bishop h3 is a big threat. King h1, now bishop e6. Our bishops are going to be bis. We're going to bring the rook to the d and e files. So let's see what happens in case of f3. f3 is actually the correct way according to computer, but it's not so easy to go, because for human this move looks very ugly because it weakens a lot of dark squares, and that's what normally we don't want to do. So here there is a bishop h3. If we cannot have anything better, we can make a draw, because after pawn takes, queen h5, and we're just going to have this funny repetition. But of course, if we don't want to draw, we can still continue playing. So in case knight b to c3, which looks like the most natural move, bringing the knight to e4, it's actually already lost for white here. It's shocking, because here there is a super nice idea. Sacrificing the whole rook f2, knight f2, and queen g3. We're ready to checkmate on h2, and it's going to take a lot of material not to lose just on spot. So that was h3 move. So now knight g5 is another move, trying to go for the nice e4 squared outpost for the knight, and at the same time there is no longer this bishop g4 pin. So bishop f5, we're again going to target the e5 square because we don't want to have a knight there, that white has a knight on e4. So here, in case knight goes to e4, well, then it's very easy because take, and we have bishop c5. We are, first of all, targeting the d1 offering, or not offering, but threatening to take and checkmate. And also we threaten to take on f2, and white is already lost. In case of queen e2, then we have knight d5. We're bringing closer our piece. And after knight e4, basically we have similar position. After bishop c5, there are big troubles on f2, since after bishop e3, pawn takes, there is rook b8. So now white doesn't have this pawn structure any longer on f2. So now there are these two pawns on the e file. Okay, we still have these double pawns, but white, due to the lack of the development, the knight is still not out, and this pawn on f2 in semi-open file, we're still holding an equality. So in case knight goes to c3, now it's threatening with the knight to jump to e4. Well, now we go for bishop b4, pinning the knight, not allowing knight to jump to e4. So also at the same time, we were threatening to trade. So white has to do something. Queen e2 looks very logical. Now bishop c3, we are ruining the pawn structure of white, the same like they did for us here. So now we play h6, offering the knight goes to e4, and now queen d5. We're also challenging the knight. At the next move, we can play rook d8 with the threat of taking on e4. The pawn structure, okay, we're having some issues as well on c file, but I think that the white's pawn are more reachable for us, and due to the piece activity, it's going to be easier to target those. So I think that the weaknesses are in somewhat way compensating each other, and we're having around equal position. Bishop g5 with a tempo. So immediately attacking our queen. Probably it's the best try for white to go for, because it's immediately asking question where to put the queen, and it's not so easy to react, because okay, you don't want to go in d7 because it stops the bishop, and you also kind of don't want to go to e8 because it falls into the spin. But we have to go to e8 because from e8 at least there is more action. We can go to g6, beautiful square, and h5 later. We can attack the king on the king side. So if white is starting with h3, stopping the idea of bishop g4, well, it's not a good move, because here we can already go with queen to g6. And now we have e4 move and h6 in the pocket. Also at the same time, rook f3 threat is there because bishop is defended by the knight. So many ideas now for white. For black, sorry, knight goes to d2, defending knight on f3. So now h6, attacking the bishop, so bishop goes back. But now bishop h3, checkmate threat is there, bishop g3, and now bishop g4. And we actually managed to get with the bishop to g4, even though white played this h3 move. We just took the pawn and then we went to g4. So knight bd2 immediately makes a lot of sense, developing the piece and also defending the knight on f3. Bishop g4, still creating a pin. a3, now we take on f3. Normally, actually, we don't want to take it, but in this case, it's very important that it's very concrete. Many of the slides are very concrete, and especially here, bishop takes, knight takes, and we go e4. We're following up this, attacking the knight. Next move, we are threatening to go with a queen to e5 after knight moves, and threatening checkmate ideas and taking a bishop on g5. So in case queen goes to d4, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. Well, here there is already another sacrifice. Rook takes on f3, because after pawn takes, there is queen g6, and there is a big problem with the bishop on g5, since after h4 there is h6. Okay, queen e4, of course we have to take, then we take on g5, and rook f to e8. We're getting into the position where we have two pieces for a rook and two pawns, but two pawns are weak and doubled, and we're just going to eat them later. But yeah, definitely a great position for black and clear advantage in the endgame. So now we go for the bishop h4, then we have knight d5, and the next move we threaten to go with a knight to f4. We're getting closer to attack on the king side, also bringing the queen somewhere to g6 as well, targeting the g2 square. So now queen d4 basically is the only way to save for white. But here there is rook f3 move, gf3, queen g6 check. Now if king goes to h1, then we are already winning, because we're going to take the pawn on h3, since king g2 can be met by knight f4. But if king f1, then we have knight f4 immediately. Again, there is a checkmate threat, so white has to go bishop g3, the only move. And after queen f5, it looks like pretty much it. It looks like white is lost, but actually, no, white is not lost, because after bishop f4, we cannot really take, because then we're going to have material problems. So we take on h3. After king g1, okay, of course, it's checkmate. But in case king goes to e2, in case king goes to e2, we have to go for this perpetual check, unfortunately. Okay, of course, if king will run away, then we're taking with a bishop, and we're going to win material. But yeah, it's going to be a perpetual, unfortunately. But very nice attack. So of course, white can also go wrong anytime. In case bishop goes to h4, first, the idea is to put the bishop on g3 and defend the position of the king. So makes a lot of sense. Now we go with bishop to g4. creating a pin. As always, we love to do it. Knight bd2, now queen g6. And now basically all of our moves are pretty active. We're trying to create an attack. That's why we need to have this aggressive and dynamic play style. We would love to play rook e8 and push for e4 as well. We want to create some issues on the king side. So in case bishop g3, we have rook a to d8, putting the rook, this x-raying the queen. For example, in case bishop takes on e5, that would not really work out because of bishop takes f3. Because of course, if we would take on e5, there would be knight takes, but it's not really working out. So bishop takes f3, knight takes, and now bishop e5. So now there is a problem here. Knight e5, rook d1, knight takes, rook a1, hg, and we're just having an extra piece, so it doesn't work for white. c3, white is okay, first of all, removing the pawn from c2 potentially could be a weakness. And secondly, okay, at some moment, also b2 pawn could be an attack, so white is building up such pawn structure. Also considering the fact that at some moment maybe d4 square could be occupied by some piece. So we go for bishop f3. We are taking only on f3 when we can follow up with e4. So after knight takes e4. So normally we don't take on f3 only when we can follow up with e4. e4 happens. Now queen b3 check. This was also opening the queen to b3 earlier. Now king h8 and now knight d4, bringing the knight to the active square, and now knight d5, our favorite move. Now we can already fight and play for e3, opening up the position of the king on g1. And yeah, we're definitely having a compensation in this position for our pawn structure. But the position is definitely very interesting because our pieces are very active and the attack is ongoing against the white's king. So it's pretty tough for white as well. Rook e4. So the idea is just to blockade and not to allow e4, but it's very strange move, right? Like you normally don't put the rook on e4. It's not a good blockader. So bishop f3. Now we cannot play e4, but we have another idea. First of all, taking with a piece would be ideal, but white cannot do it because taking with a queen, first of all, is not possible because there is a rook on f8, and taking with a knight would lose the rook. So the only way to take it with a pawn. So now we took to double the pawns, and after knight d5, we have found a lot of weak squares in the white's king position. So definitely a messy position and a complex position with an attack, which we have against white's king. So that was this rook e1 move, and now we are going to the main line, which is bishop takes c6. So here white wants to spoil our pawn structure, and we're taking. And here rook e1 is just going to transpose to the d4 8th move d4. We already had this position before. So now we're going to. So now knight e5. So according to the computer, this is the main try for advantage from white. So that's why it's important for us to handle this position well. So we take on e5, we have to do it. Now rook e1, and we're playing queen e7, defending the bishop. And in this position, there are two main moves for white, which are d4 and f4, which are very, very tempting. But one move, which is the best in this position, is king h1. So, of course, it's probably not so easy immediately to understand king h1 when someone is playing this position, especially if someone doesn't know this position. But we have to, of course, to count with the best move. And generally, okay, moves like d4 and f4 are most likely. So that's why we don't really have to worry because most of the games might go in this direction. So let's start and understand why these moves are wrong. Well, because they're exposing the king. So after f4, there is diagonal exposing check to the king with a bishop to d4. And now the whole idea of this line is, okay, first of all, king f1 would be very bad because after bishop 6 f5, we can even castle, and after taking there is a big trouble and white is losing. So king h1 has to be played. Then we go bishop e6 and f5 castle. So here the main idea, of course, is that after take pawn takes, we're opening up the file and we're having the dark squared bishop. So the main idea of it to give up the other bishop, the light squared bishop, to keep the dark squared bishop in the position. In case here knight d2 is played, we have knight d5, knight f3, bringing the queen out, knight f6, knight takes on d4, queen d4, fe, fe, and c3, white is targeting our queen. Queen f2, we're coming into the position of white. Bishop d2, white is trying to develop and threaten with some. Okay, rook e1 cannot really threaten yet, but just developing. Rook b8 putting pressure on the b file. b3 defending the pawn. Rook f6, we are ready to double here. After rook f1, we have to trade the pieces and play a5, getting more space on the queen side. We're getting into this position where it feels like we have a lot of weak pawns, but actually we also, like, white also has some issues with continuing because pawn is on c3 is under attack. Bishop is defending it, so bishop cannot really get out. Bishop also cannot really attack our pawns like efficiently, so it's a little bit difficult, and our king is also very close to defend the pawns, so it's going to be a round equal endgame. So here, if white takes on e6, we are going forward with knight d5. So basically, the main point is that we don't need to take here right away because we will anyway open the f file. So c3, bishop f2, targeting the rook. Now rook e4. Now we take. And now basically we have again this pawn structure with a e pawn, the isolated e pawn, and doubled c pawn. Knight d2. We're going back to f6, targeting the queen. If rook goes to c4 trying to attack our pawns, we have h5. And basically, our idea is to bring the knight to g4, potentially queen to h4, and attack the king. So knight e4, going attacking our pieces. We go back with the bishop to b6. Again, we're still taking away the square for the king from g1. Threats of something like knight g4 are there. For example, if white is playing h3, we still have the knight g4 because after take is going to be a checkmate. So white really has to be careful, and some checkmating and attacking ideas are in the picture. In case rook goes back to e2, attacking our bishop on f4 on f2, then we are going for knight g4, also defending the bishop and at the same time attacking on h2. So here, in case of knight f3, which is defending the pawn, we're having queen d6 with a very nice rook f3 threat, and next move to checkmate on h2. So it's already losing. Knight goes to e4, attacking the bishop makes more sense. Now we go for queen h4, but now we're attacking with a checkmate, so white has to play h3, the only way to stop it. And we go for h6, the idea to stop all kind of bishop coming to g5 or knight g5. Bishop d2, white is continuing the development, and now knight rook f3, amazing move. We are first of all, we are introducing the threat of taking on h3, and knight g5 is not anymore a move because we played this h6. So this rook f3 was earlier, but it wouldn't work because of knight g5. So now queen f1, white is trying to defend. So now take on h3 doesn't really work. It's pretty interesting. We're attacking so much, but not really winning. It's pretty sad, but okay. So rook a to f8, we're bringing another piece into the game. Bishop e1, and now rook 3 to f5. So now it was a threat already to take on f3. It's very big. There is a lot of pressure against the king and all the pieces of white, but it's still very difficult to find the ways how to continue with all the threats. So the position is pretty complex because of this attack. Materially speaking, we're not down anything. So materially speaking, we're absolutely fine. But if we're going to have an attack, if we're going to have a successful attack with checkmate, we will see practically in the game, it can happen because the opponent can always make a mistake. So that's why this position is very promising for black, because any mistake and we can win already. Well, that was f4 move, and now we're looking at this other main option, d4. So here is the idea. Of course, the check to the king is not possible via d4, but via h2. Now bishop takes h2, king h2, and bishop e6 now. Now bishop e6, and the point is, okay, now, of course, there is no d5 any longer. We gave up the bishop on h2, but we weakened the king. We removed the h pawn from the king. So let's start with b3 move. White is going b3. We have queen f6, attacking on f2, also putting some pressure on the rook. Queen f3, offering a trade. We are going for it. Queen takes gf, long castle, and now bishop e3. And we have already c5 in order to undouble our pawns. So pawn takes on c5. We're meanwhile sacrificing a pawn, so to say, knight d5. And the position is getting interesting because we're having this 3 against 2 pawns and against the king. So for sure, some attack could happen on the king side. At the same time, there are 4 against 2, but okay, some double pawns from white on the queen side. So far, not really visible what is going to happen next move, but definitely there is a compensation for the pawn and counterattack from black. In case queen f3 played immediately, with the idea also to take on c6, now we are castling long and letting white to take on c6. It looks risky, but it's also risky for white, not only risky for black. So after knight rook c3, knight c3, so rook d4, we're taking queen c3, and now rook h to d8, bringing the rook, so there are never any like queen a8 checks, and we can sometimes maybe hide with the king to d7, e8 if something happens. Now king g1, white is removing the king, and queen h4. Now we have ideas already to double on the h file to checkmate on h1. The king of white is weak. We also have a weak king. Well, the positions of both our kings are pretty shaky, and it's going to be a game for 2 or even 3 results. I don't know. But yeah, both attacks are ongoing. Pretty sharp position. We have a big attack ongoing. We have to also be careful with what white is doing. So now king comes to h1. This is the move what I was talking is, which is the best move. Basically, the point of this move is not to rush with f4 and d4, and now introduce f4 in the position in the next move, with the main idea not to allow black to have to keep this bishop on this g1, a8, a7 diagonal. So now we have nothing else to do. We castle. In case of d4, well, it could bring some problems because after rook d8, we're pinning the queen. After queen d3, we have queen h4. So now, again, another problem. But the only way to take on e5 is with a rook. Rook takes, and now after f6, rook e4, queen f2. We managed to take a pawn on f file. And, well, we have a very nice counterplay. Our pieces are ready to jump into the attack, bishop f5 and so on. So, yeah, pretty interesting position to play and to fight. So, f4. Now we go f6. Our main idea is again to open up the f file as in previous lines, also here, just to open a tab. So pawn takes on e5, pawn takes on e5. Now we reached our pawn structure. In this position, we don't have a bishop pair advantage, but we have the open h file potential entry squares on f2. That's why it's important for white in this position, try to put the knight on e4 in order to stop all the entries on the second rank from our rooks. So let's start with queen e2. First of all, queen e2 is enabling option of entering on the f2 and also targeting our pawn on e5. We go for knight d5 because we are not afraid of takes. There would be a checkmate on f1. Knight d2, now knight f4. Our knight already reached very nice position on f4 and it's going to transpose to the knight d2 line. So in case knight d2, it also can transpose actually to the to the knight c3 line, because after knight is reaching the e4 square, then it's transposing to the knight c3 knights and the knight c3 line, since knight can go there via c3 as well. So here we go knight d5 as well. Knight f3 is attacking the pawn, but it's actually not so good to attack it from this square, because now there is bishop g4, creating a pin on the knight, and wait, now is already black is the one who is slightly better due to all the piece activity. Now queen e2, we're going for knight f4, again we're transposing to this line. Now queen takes on e5, we go for queen f7. Okay, there are no checkmate on f1 or something like this, but we're just removing our queen away. If case of queen a7, white is chasing our queen to trade, we go for queen g6 with a threat on g2. Queen e4, defending. Now queen h5, we're removing the queen away again. Again, we're just trying to keep the pressure. Now white goes for knight f1, trying to defend everything with this piece. Knight g2, the sacrifice is happening. So now the problem is if king goes to g2, we're managing to include our bishop to h3, king g1, and now rook a to e8. Some problems on this file. So queen c4 check is the only move, but now there is a very, very good move, brilliant move, rook e6, because now it's not possible to take anymore on e6 for white, because there is going to be a checkmate on f1. So knight g3, now queen f6. After rook takes again, we're again introducing checkmate, actually two checkmates. So queen e6, white has to take with the queen, bishop takes, rook takes, and now queen d1 check, king g2, and h5. We're getting positions where white has a rook and two minor pieces for the queen. So objectively speaking, it's of course much better than the queen. But in this particular case, since the pieces are not working on the queen side, we kind of play queen and rook against rook and the knights. And with the h5, h4 attacks, we're just going to checkmate white. So what happens in case the queen takes on g2? Well, now of course we still go for bishop h3, bringing bishop all the way to the position on the king side. Queen takes c6, trying to take some material, but now bishop d7, very nice move. So of course queen cannot really, I mean, could try, but cannot really take because of the queen coming to e3 on f2, so it's not really possible. So queen b7, now c6, we're blocking the way back for the queen. Now queen goes to b3 with a check, we go away, and now d4. Now queen has, and now again the third rank to return back, but now bishop e6. Very interesting that the piece cannot be taken. It's very nice and interesting. White is always trying to control the f3 square, but we always attack it. So now in case queen goes to queen takes on e6, and we go for queen f3, king g1. And okay, already in this position, of course, rook is defended. We cannot really take it, so we have to enjoy the draw in this position, which is very fighting draw, so we shouldn't be upset about the result. So now rook f1, another try from white. Now we are ready to go with knight e3, because after rook f7, we have knight e5. Rook c7, and now bishop f5 for f1 square was under control, so no checkmate. And after c3, we go just rook a to e8. Our rooks are very nice pieces. We gave up a pawn, but our pieces are too active, so it's very tough to handle here for white. So in case knight goes to c4 and targeting the square from on e5, targeting the pawn on e5 from the c4, it's already better, much better for white. Here we go rook f5, very interesting way to protect the pawn, but we will need the rook anyway to double on the f5. We want to bring the other rook on f8. So, and also rook at some moment could also go somewhere on the 5th rank, so it's definitely better square for the rook. Now bishop b2, we go for bishop a6, attacking the knight on c4. In case pawn protects the knight on c4, we have rook a f8. As said, as promised, we doubled our pawns on the f file. And after rook e2, white is stopping rook f2 entrance. We have queen f6. And now we have very nice position because we tripled on the f file. We can enter f2, f1 at some moment. So white has to be really very careful. And again, even though we have this strange pawn structure, not so good, we have absolutely amazing pieces and active pieces. So for that, we are compensating, and there is definitely a compensation, or even slightly better for black in this position. So now knight c3. White is offering a trade. Of course, we have to take. Knight takes, bishop takes, and rook a f8. So now we're going to continue with a move like bishop b7, putting c5, bishop b7 first. It's better to play not to give up a pawn on a7. But I think also if bishop takes, there is c5 and bishop will be trapped, so it's not possible to take. So c5, bishop b7, trying to put the pressure against the king. The position evaluation is equal, but due to all this imbalances we have in the position, there is definitely a chance for both sides. b3, white wants to develop the bishop on b2 to put pressure on e5. Well, we are fine with that. We are going with our bishop as well on this long diagonal, bishop b7, bishop b2, and now rook a to f8. We're ready with the rooks to double on this file and enter somewhere in f2 at some moment. We don't need to protect the pawn on e file because we have the f file. So rook takes on e5. White should try it and try to test it. Now we go queen g5. Also, we already can feel some pressure on g2. Rook takes, queen takes. Now ideas is to go, of course, with c5, knight f4, and attacking the pawn on g2. In case queen goes to f3, we are ready to trade, take the pawn. Now we want back the pawn, and we're getting into interesting pawn endgame. Again, we're having this pawn structure, but c5 is a threat, bringing the knight to f4, and so on. So there could be still an issues even with the king, even in the endgame, but position is objectively equal. Queen comes to g1, trying to defend and stop queen entering on f2 square. We bring our knight to f4, ready to go with c5. Now, queen a7, queen is taking the pawn, knight d3, we're also taking the pawn, and just securing a draw here, because after pawn takes, we have c5, and there is a problem on g2. And now the point is that we are also locking back the way for the queen, so that now actually there is a checkmate threat on f1 as well. So in case knight goes back to d2, we have bishop g2, king g2, and after queen f2, we're just most likely going to have a perpetual in this position, or I mean, at least a draw there is going to be in some way. So if rook comes to g1, again, we have bishop g2. If king g2 is a checkmate, we should be happy. But if rook g2, which is normal, we're just going to have perpetual check on f1 and f3. And of course, it's very interesting, but yeah, what to do? We have to try. We have to try to fight. So now we're going to go for the bishop e3 line. Very interesting move. First of all, white is developing, at the same time taking care of the f2 square where we want to enter with the rook. Also, it opens the way for the knight coming to e4, so that after knight comes to d2, it's not going to block the bishop from c1. So here we go with c5. First of all, opening the diagonal for the bishop from b7. Because we have opposite colored bishops, the attack is normally stronger. And also we want at some moment to push for c4, trying to undouble our pawns and get rid of the second pawn on c5. Case white goes for b3, it's actually move which is recommended in the other course by Indian Grandmaster Arjun Kalan. He recommends b3 move. So now we're going to continue following what we can do here and how we can improve and fight as black. So we're going for knight d5. First of all, we're improving the knight, bringing the knight in the game. Since we have this pawn problems, we have pawn structure, kind of big problems to the pawn structure, but we have activities of the pieces and faster development. So since we can bring the knight faster to the game, we have to do it. So now queen d2, white is trying to prepare going for the knight c3, bishop b7, now knight c3. Now basically white wants to trade the knights, or we have also ideas already to take bishop or the knight depending what we want. Of course, sometimes or not sometimes, but it can be better to have the bishop against the knight in the endgame. So yeah, definitely there is, I mean, if we can feel the pressure on the e5 pawn, but we also have a beautiful bishop targeting the king. So now we go for queen h4, offering white to take on e5, and let's see what happens if white is taking any of the pawns. And then we're getting into the drawish position. So after queen e5, it's a forced draw after bishop g2, and we are just having the perpetual. The same thing happens after queen c5. We're also having a draw, again perpetual. And In case white doesn't take and plays knight e4, trying to activate the knight on e4, trying to put it on the outpost square. Well, now we have an interesting approach. We can take on e4, queen takes, and now, of course, there is a thing. If white's, of course, like taking with a pawn, white doesn't really want, so white takes on e4 with a rook, not to spoil the structure, but after rook f2, our pawns are getting very, very active. So now rook c4, white is defending and attacking at the same time. We go for e4, interesting idea, because now we're opening a way for the second rook. Rook cannot take because c2 is going to get weak, so taking would open the way for the rook coming from the d file. And after king comes to g1, then we go rook f8, de happens, and we go rook e2, offering the second rook to come and join the position. So rook takes on c5, now rook f2, f2, and we're getting into the position where we're most likely going to have a draw by the perpetual check on the second rank. In case of rook coming to e2, well, now white is covering the f2 square and at the same time threatening to go with a knight, to come with knight to e4. So we're going for queen d4. It is a must. We have to go for it, but it's actually working out. So in case queen takes on d4, we take with the e pawn, and now somehow our pawns are already together, and our bishop is kind of, our active bishop is compensating in a way for that. Knight goes to a4, then we're bringing the rook to a to e8, and now the point is that there is no rook e1 because of the checkmate. So that's why a rook has to take rook e8, and now after knight c5 we have bishop c6. We are going to enter the second rank and create some troubles for white. Even though we lost a pawn right now, we're going to win the material back for sure after rook coming to e2. So if queen takes on e5, then we grab it, we trade the queens, and now we go again for rook f2, attacking the pawn on c2. Rook goes back to e2, trying to defend. Now we take on g2 with a check, rook takes on e2, and rook e2 attacking the knight and the bishop. So we're going to get the position where we'll have bishop and the rook, and now we know that coloration of bishop and the rook is better than knight and the rook. And well, we have so far, of course, the equal material, but our pawn structure is worse on the queen side. So for that, we have this kind of compensation. Okay, so that was rook e2, and now we're going to go for the king g1, probably the best attempt from white. White is stopping any rook coming to f2 or queen coming to f2 with the king after all the trades which might happen, let's say on e4 and so on. So we go for rook f6. Our ideas, of course, is continuing the same. We want to double on the f file just to create counterplay. Now rook e2. Now white is also stopping this ideas, also trying to take more control over the f2 square, and also now threatens to take the pawns because now there are no threats of the perpetual any longer. So we go for queen d4. Now we have this pin, and now white has to take, queen takes. The point here is that we have to take with a c pawn. The problem with taking with e pawn is after knight a5, knight a4, rook f5, rook f1, and we just have we're just going to have big problems because we're having this weakness which we cannot defend because our bishop is light squared and we don't have any counterplay. So that's why we are forced to take with the f pawn. It is very, very important here. So now knight a4, knight is still going away and okay, threatens to go to c5 at some moment. And now we go rook c6, counterattacking on c2. If white wants to take on e5, we will recapture on c2. If rook c1, there is just rook e8 defending the pawn, and also we have ideas to go with something like e4. And in case of b4, it would be a very nice move because knight is coming to c5 and attacking the bishop at the same time threatening to create an outpost on e4. So here we go e4 ourselves. We're just breaking everything. So of course, rook cannot take on e4. It's going to be either pawn takes on e4 or knight c5. In case knight c5, then we are going for rook b6, knight c4, rook takes b4, and it should be fine for black because, of course, first of all, we got rid of our weaknesses, and we can try to create attack against white pawns as well, and our bishop is also good. So yeah, definitely many good things, so nothing bad already. If pawn takes on e4, then we have a5 move. We're trying to get more activity and open the a file for the rook. So in case knight goes to c5, we takes on b4, knight b7, and actually the knight cannot really get out. If knight goes to d8, we have rook d6. So we're just going to trap the knight and take it the next moves. So white goes for b5, counterattacking, attacking our rook. Now we go for rook c4, very interesting, attacking the knight on a4, forcing it going back to b2, and going for b4, attacking the knight and the pawn on b5. Black is going to win back the pawn, and we're going to have a pretty complex endgame, but okay, it would be not real issues for black to save it, so there is not going to be a big troubles, and the game should finish in a draw. We got very deep into the line just because we had this clash of our courses, and of course, now we wanted to show that, of course, it's possible to get into the drawish position or equalish position as black, and we shouldn't really worry about this. But first of all, I want to tell you that you should not worry about this line. Most likely, you're not going to get it over the board unless your opponent studied this line somehow, prepared it to the game, but it's very unlikely, I would say. So please don't worry getting into this line. And well, we're going forward with the other moves. So it was a b3 move, very, very, very nice and very strong move. Now we go for knight c3. Well, this move again is bringing this main idea of bringing the knight to the e4 square, fighting for this outpost square. And now we have a super nice idea, as we were mentioning earlier, the c5 move, not only to open it for the not only to open diagonal for the bishop, but also to break with c4. And now we're going for it. We're getting rid of our weakness in case bishop goes to d4, with creating a double attack on the not double attack, but creating an attack against the e5 pawn. We go for bishop b7, pointing out at the king side, rook e5, and now queen d7, attacking the bishop and also attacking the pawn on d3. And with this strong bishop and also opportunities of taking on d3 and attack the king on the queen side, we're having compensation for sure. So if bishop takes on b6 now, we're taking with the a pawn, dc, and we play bishop b7, knight d5, and queen d6 again. Again, we're having a compensation due to our activity of the pieces. Our rook is open on the semi-open a file, targeting the pawn on a2. Other rook can always go to f2 square, and we have always a break with the b5, so we have a good position, as well as the bishop on b7 is a great piece. So in case knight goes to d2, which is a bit more flexible, at the same time, not only going for the e4 square, but also controlling the c4 from any of the c4 pushes. So here we go for knight d5, attacking the bishop and improving our piece to the d5. So if bishop goes back to g1, we have very nice move, c4 again, very, very nice pawn sacrifice. Because the point is that after knight takes on c4, we have knight f4, and in case rook takes in second pawn, we have bishop b7 with the threat of the checkmate in case white is taking on e7. So if knight goes back to d2, trying to stop, trying to bring the knight to e4, we have h5 here, with the idea of bringing the bishop either to g4 or to b7, put pressure on the g2 square. We have a big compensation for the pawn, huge threats from black, so it's tough to play for white here. In case knight comes to e4, bishop c4 is a very unpleasant threat, so we have to handle it. That's why we take on e3, we trade the knight for the bishop, rook takes, and we go for bishop b7 on the very, very long and good diagonal. Now we want to put the pressure on the knight on e4. We're going to do it with the moves like rook comes to f4. We can also, of course, double on the f file, and also breaking the position of white's pawns with c4. At the same time, removing our weakness, by the way. So in case white goes for b3, we're going to go for f4, and we are again having equal position, threatening to take on e4 at some moment, and threatening also to double on the file. If queen goes to e2, then we go rook f2 again, or rook f4, sorry. And now we're preparing to double, so rook e1, we double. h3, white wants to have the square on h2 in case of any problems on the back rank. So queen f7, now we're tripled already on the queen side. And we're while white is also tripled on the king side, on the e file. And now white goes for b3, stopping the c4 ideas. But now after bishop f4, de, rook f2 is the move. So yeah, rook f2 is the move, targeting the queen. Queen goes to the queen side, wants to take our pawns. And here we have the very nice move, h5. I mean, rook c2 is also fine to take the pawn, but there is no reason to give up the f5. So we don't need to rush for the pawns, to take the pawns, but rather play f5, h5. And we're already creating some ideas later on with rook f1. So, for example, after queen c5, rook f1, rook f1, queen f1, king h2, and queen f4. And okay, here white has to repeat with king h1. Since if white is playing rook g3, it's going to lose to h4, and that's not going to be good for white. So knight c3 in this position. White is again going for the e4 square. That's kind of one of the main plans from white. We're going knight d5, again also activating our piece. We have, of course, opportunities later also to bring it, to bring it later to f4 square, and which would be very good. In case bishop goes to d2, it would be a bit more passive because we already have bishop f5, and after knight comes, takes, in case of de, knight comes to f4, and in case rook takes, we have rook f2 already entering on the f file. Rook e1, and after rook af8, we have a pretty interesting complex position. Of course, if white is going to take, there will be issues. So yeah, definitely an interesting try, and we already got the f file as a compensation for the bad pawn structure. 92, white is immediately occupying the e4 square, where we go bishop f5 again as before. If queen goes to e4, again we take on e4. We're trying to force white to make a decision, either give up the f2 square or with taking on with the queen on e4. Or with taking on d4 on e4 with the pawn, and now somehow spoiling the structure. Now we're going with the knight to f4. If bishop takes, pawn takes, queen c4, white is going greedy a bit, taking the pawn, but after queen f5, we're attacking on b2, and also we threaten to open up the position of the white king with f3. We're just getting a good position and compensation for this pawn. And if queen c4 check goes immediately, we have queen e6 defending from the check. And of course, if white is trading, we're going to have, okay, double pawns. But again, we're going to have opportunities always to enter with the rook on f2 square. And yeah, bishop will also not be able to attack the pawn so much. And we'll just have around equal endgame. So we shouldn't really be worried there. Knight g3, white is attacking our bishop on f5. But now we basically shouldn't be worried much because knight from e4 is defending the f2 square. And now since bishop goes away, then we can play bishop g6 and already threaten to come with a rook to f2. And after queen e2, we have queen c5, putting a pressure on white since rook f2 is coming in the next moves. So bishop comes to g5, attacking our queen is one of the, of course, also critical moves. Bishop attacking the queen. And now we go for b4. Now we go for the queen side, creating some threats, taking on b2. So that's why white kind of has to go with b3. But we can some dark squares, but it's okay, since we don't really have dark square bishop. So now queen goes to d4. We're putting more and more pressure. We create some threats already to take. So here, in case bishop goes back to d2. So the thing is here that after rook a to d8, there is queen c1, h6. So there are a few moves, of course. a4, white is trying to expand on the queen side. Rook f7, we are preparing to double the rooks on the f file. Now bishop takes on a4 already is a move, and after queen c5 again we're getting into the f file, we're getting the square, and yeah, definitely taking on e5 would be a bit problematic for white. Bishop comes to e3, of course we have to take, we're not giving up our queen. Takes, and now bishop takes on e4, queen takes, the trade happens, and we're again entering with the rook on f2. We're getting similar rook endgame, we already had something like this. Now rook c4 and e4 again, opening up this file for the rook. Now king comes to g1, rook e2, and well, we're threatening to take on d3, or entering with the rook to the second rank on the d file. So now h6 also possible. Now we're stopping any kind of jumps on g5. Also at the same time we're opening the h7 square for the king. In case queen comes to c1, trying to point out our pawn on h6, and also ideas of playing queen bishop e3 are there. Now we go bishop g6, bishop e3, knight e3, we're trading. In case rook takes e3, we have rook f4 to build the pressure on the knight on e4, and after queen e3 we're just going for rook f1, and actually we are crushing here because the rook takes, we're winning a queen. So that was this. In case of h3, which also looks logical to create a square for the king later, we go for rook f7, and after king h2, rook f8. Again, we are winning the fight against the f file while white has this outpost, but at some moment we are always threatening to take it, to take the knight, or in case knight moves away, we will always remove the bishop and come on f7 square. Bishop rook coming to c1, so white is already threatening at some moment to go for, but actually yeah, knight c3 is it is possible, but it's not really working out. So now we go for bishop e4. We're not giving any chances for white to go for the c3. In case rook takes on e4, I would like you to stop here video and try to find the best move for black. Of course, it's knight c3 going for the fork. Now rook takes, and after knight takes, the problem is that there is going to be always this intermezzo check on f2, and yeah, well, we're just going to have the rook hanging. Rook f1 is also a checkmate threat, so we are just winning. Pawn takes on e4, we're trading the queens and coming with knight to c3. Now rook d7. Now white's rook is entering the 7th rank, and actually so far we've been following the game of with white pieces Wesley So, with black pieces Shahriar Mamediarov from online game on chess.com from 2022. And here, instead of taking on e4, which happened in the game, black will continue with taking on a2, because after rook c7 there is knight b4 threatening to take on c3, and if pawn c moves, we can always have knight d3, and at the same time we also have the rook f7 attacking the rook. At the same time, also the pawn on a file can start pushing. We have around balanced position, since the pawns on e file are pretty much the same, and white's pawns on the queen side could be also a bit weaker. Also moves like rook f2 are in the position as well. So that was all for this chapter. Let me go with you through the main ideas, topical moves from this chapter, to memorize this, to remember. So we're getting this position with the move d4. So white is immediately asking questions and want to trade our pawns. The most important to remember here, we don't want to trade. We have issues because we haven't castled yet. We have also this pin here that would just help white enormously. So we don't want to help white, but we have to push for e4. And then we're ready to defend the e pawn with the f pawn later. So that's the first one. Next position is here white took on e5. We already were discussing it, that it feels very natural, logical to take with a bishop on e5, not to spoil the pawn structure. But actually, taking with the f pawn is very interesting, and it creates so many opportunities for black. So that's why we recommend to take with the f pawn, because the position when the bishop takes on e5, it's a little bit tricky, because due to the pawn on f6, if pawn would be on f7, it would be just great position. Of course, bishop would be hanging here, but if we could put the pawn back, it would be just amazing. But we cannot, and for that reason, there are just some weaknesses on the light squares, which makes our position not so great. But taking with the pawn, compromising the pawn structure a little bit, but opening the f file with potential threats on f2 is definitely worth it. It's our main of the topic of this chapter, is to open the f file and create an attack, counter-attack, so that we have bad pawn structure, but we have ideas, we have active pieces, we have better development. So next position is when we took on e5. It's not about what we play here, it's just generally about this pawn structure. We're getting this pretty often in this chapter, where we have an isolated pawn e file, we have double pawns on c file, but in return for that, we have a bishop here, and we have a semi-open f file on which we could create some threats. So that's why it's kind of well compensated by this pawn structure is well compensated by our active bishops, our active pieces, and the semi-open f file. So that's definitely something what we are working on, and especially the king side, we try to create an attack play, bring the bishop to g4, bring the queen to the king side, attack the king on the king side for white. Okay, next position is a very interesting one. Here again, it's rather about the position, not about our next move, because currently white is to move. So we get into this position, and our main idea is after d4 or f4. For example, after f4, our main idea is to keep the bishop alive, playing check, and then giving white back the other bishop, the bishop on e6, because this bishop on dark side bishop is going to be a much better piece. But in case white goes for d4, then we're ready to take on h2, king takes, then we would then again play bishop e6, and we would open up the king a little bit, trade the e pawn for the h pawn, so it would be very interesting approach. And in case white goes for king h1, well, but then we have to go for the castle and f6. Then we don't have any other choice. But okay, this happens. What to do? Sometimes white can go for something like this. Okay, next position is again something what we are getting normally. Basically, we have pawn structure problems, but in return we have good pieces. We have very well developed pieces, good activity of the pieces. We have the f file, potentially the very strong f2 square. White achieved the blockade on e4. Our main idea is to bring the bishop to b5 and threaten to take the knight at some moment. So that's why we played bishop f5. So that's mainly about the character of the game. White has a good pawn structure. White has static advantage in this position, but we have dynamic advantage. We have rook on the f file. We have active pieces. We are ready at some moment taking on e4 and attack the king as well. So that's very important to remember here. So far, that's it for the chapter of Italian of d3, d5 with the bishop b5. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for studying it. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you again soon.